Is a renewed, or even let's just use the term resurrected life. It often looks radically different than even the recent life. Now, I remember going through a season of counseling, and it was during this time where some of you know my story. My ex-wife just ghosted me. In fact, I lived in the house, and it changed overnight. I lived in the house for over a year, at which point she wouldn't even speak to me or communicate with me at all, even ignoring me in front of our children. And they saw this carry on every single day. And I couldn't move out of the house because that would have been taken as abandonment and could legally affect me and my rights to see the kids. At some point, she filed for a legal separation and then ultimately divorce. During that season, I'm meeting with the counselor, the one that referred me for the psychiatric evaluation, and he asked me, he said, you know, one of the big questions is to you, this thing has now died. Can this marriage resurrect? In fact, he said that's the entire message of faith. That's the entire message of the gospel is, can this thing that's dead, whether it's a business, whether it is your finances, whether it is some other sort of relationship, some opportunity, a health condition, can this thing resurrect? And we believe in the resurrection, and that really got me thinking, well, at the time, I hope it does. And I hope it moves forward. And I prayed and leaned in hard that it would, and it didn't. And that led me to learning one of the lessons and ideas that I want to teach with you in this video. Sometimes the resurrected life doesn't look like the pre-resurrected life. Let me explain it to you like this. Even Jesus' closest friends, after he rose from the dead, didn't recognize him. You might know the story. Early on the first Easter Sunday morning, some of the women and some of the disciples go to the tomb. Mary Magdalene is said to be the first person that saw the empty tomb, and she's the one that reported it to the disciples. Well, she went there, and she sees the tomb is empty, and she turns and looks around and sees the person that she thinks is the gardener, the caretaker, there at the cemetery, and she says to the gardener, she says, "Have you seen where they put him?" Now, for a while, she speaks with the gardener, and it's only after the gardener calls her by name and says, "Mary," that she recognizes the voice and realizes that this is not the gardener, this is Jesus. And you think, how did a woman who closely walked with him for several years, how did a woman out of whom he had cast 7 demons, is what the scripture says, so he had helped her through a very traumatic experience, how did a close confidant not recognize someone who was right there in front of her? Later on, that same weekend, Jesus is said to have walked on the road to Emmaus with 2 other disciples, not 2 of the 12, but just 2 others who were probably, based on the story, insiders. They walked several miles the entire time talking about Jesus, and he opened up the scriptures from memory because they didn't have a Bible right there that he was just carrying, but he starts talking to them from the Old Testament, showing how Jesus had to be killed, how he had to die, and how he was going to arise. And the 2 had just been in shock and in awe because, in their own words, they said, "We thought that he was going to be the one to redeem us." Now, you remember that word, redeem. We thought he was going to be the one that was going to be freedom. Well, that evening, they invite him into the house, and as they sit there and eat, he breaks the bread. And after he breaks the bread, as he's doing this and praying a blessing, they realize that he is Jesus. You see, 2 people didn't realize who he was that were very familiar with him. Well, Jesus then appears through a wall where the 11 disciples and some of the other women, those who are close, are locked in hiding for fear, the scripture says, that the Jewish authorities would get them and kill them. He appears, and even in that moment, they don't recognize him. They think that he's a ghost. In fact, some of the other disciples that are in there, even Thomas says, I won't believe it. And he says, "No, look, here, put your hands and feel the scars, feel the wounds in my hand, my side, my feet." So why and how did people not know who he was? And here's the tension. I think he looked different. I think he looked different before the cross, before he endured the traumatic experience that he endured. I think he looked different on the cross. The scripture says that on the cross, he didn't even look human, according to Isaiah, while he was enduring the trauma. I think he looked different after the cross. In other words, sometimes even the recent past, things can take a radical turn for even the better.